It looks like Dodge and Ram will be returning to the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series in 2026, and the U.S. Court of Appeals has overturned the preliminary injunction for 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're first going to take a look at a couple paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ross Chastain's 2025 Busch Light Apple scheme that we'll see this weekend at Michigan. I really love the look of this car. I'm always a big fan of the Busch Light Apple schemes. This one's no exception. It looks really, really good. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend in Michigan. It looks fantastic. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Carson Nosabar's 2025 Total Play scheme that we'll see next weekend at Mexico City. I love this car, and it's really nice to see a local brand coming in and sponsoring for Carson. It's a really nice looking car. I think Spire knocked this one out of the park. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack next week at Mexico. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ryan Ellis's 2025 Tableau scheme that we'll see next weekend at Mexico City. I love the Mexico look it's got on the car. I think there's a lot of good color scheme to this. I think DGM Racing knocked this one out of the park. It looks really, really solid. Definitely looking forward to seeing on the racetrack next week at Mexico. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Tony Breidinger's 2025 Coach scheme that we'll see in 2 truck races in 2025, including this weekend. I think this truck looks really awesome, and it's really exciting to see the coaches coming in and sponsoring Tony Breidinger for a couple races this year. It does look solid. It does look really good. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack in 2025. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Michigan purse money for this weekend. So every time we have a NASCAR Cup, Xfinity, and Truck Series race, Bob Pockets puts out the purse money for the event. And according to Bob, for the Cup race, it's $11,055,250, and for the truck race, it's $782,900. Obviously, the Cup Series, with the charter money they tend to get a ton of money. It's, of course, been increased with the new charter deal. Meanwhile, the Truck Series fails to even score $1 million in a single week. I think especially with Dodge rumors of them coming back, I think that we'll see that number of purse increase for sure. But I think it's a little bit disappointing. That's why you've not seen a lot of full fields in the Truck Series, because the purses have not been that big this year. Nonetheless, I like seeing an increase for trucks, but at least on the Cup side, there's a good amount of purse money for the weekend. I think the purse money is solid for Cup, and it is pretty good overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about manufacturers. Now, so far in 2025, Chevrolet scored 5 wins in the Cup Series, Toyota has scored 5 wins in the Cup Series this year, and Ford has scored 4 wins in the Cup Series this year. This is just the 5th season in NASCAR history, according to the NASCAR Insights account, to have all 3 manufacturers win at least 4 of the first 14 races. In fact, I think it's only 2 or 3 times in this century, I believe, that this has happened. The only other time in the last few years has been 2021. We have seen a lot of parity in the NASCAR Cup Series this year, but most of these wins have come from 3 teams: Hendrick, Gibbs, and Penske. And obviously, Hendrick Motorsports, they've won all but one of the Chevy victories. That, of course, being Ross Chastain, who's the only person not associated with Hendrick, Gibbs, or Penske that's been able to pick up a win this year. Though I do think we're going to see a couple surprise guys like Shane Van Gisbergen and among other guys who are going to have a chance and an opportunity to break this mold. So I think it's pretty crazy that we're seeing consistency with the manufacturers. I think we're going to see Toyota maybe get that overall lead with how good they've been in Michigan historically. So I think that's something to watch out for. But nonetheless, kind of wild stats in my opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Form Energy. As it was announced earlier today that Form Energy has formed up a partnership with Hendrick Motorsports, and they're going to be starting to sponsor Hendrick Motorsports for the remainder of this year and have signed a partnership with them through 2027. They're going to have a primary for 2 races for William Byron in 2025, 2026, and also 2027 as well. And they will be an associate for Alex Bowman, Kyle Larson, and William Byron as well. The reason it will not have any sort of association with Chase Elliott is because of the fact of his Coca-Cola deal, and they don't have any. I don't believe they've got any energy drink companies that are really associated with the Coke brand, but because of his Coke deal, that's not to be the case. So what's interesting about this is both William Byron and Kyle Larson, they do have personal brand deals of energy drink companies. Kyle Larson under the Prime Energy umbrella with KSI Logan Paul, And then, of course, you have William Byron, who's under the Celsius brand. But Form Energy is under the Anheuser-Busch company. They also, of course, have been sponsoring Kyle Busch this year. They're working with a personal endorsement deal with Kyle Busch. I'd love to see a Kyle Busch sponsorship deal down the road. But this is a really, really big deal nonetheless. And I think it's pretty cool that Form Energy is coming to work with Hendrick. They picked up a lot of big sponsors like Amazon Prime, which has sponsored Kyle Larson and Chase Elliott this year. And in a nutshell, bringing new sponsors in is a big deal. Pretty excited to see Form Energy come in and work with Hendrick Motorsports. Really exciting stuff overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Tyler Tomasi. As it was announced earlier this evening that Tyler Tomasi will be joining NBM Motorsports in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series in 2025. They will run in a couple weekends from now at Pocono Raceway. Now, the number has not been announced at this time, but is also confirmed, I believe, by Joseph Strigley as well, that Derek White is going to make a few starts in their Truck Series program as well. Last year, NBM Motorsports did compete in a select couple Truck Series starts with Jeff Earnhardt behind the wheel. Unfortunately, if I'm not mistaken, at Charlotte Motor Speedway, they had a Toyota body, and they unfortunately ended up crashing out of the event. Tyler has made select starts for NBM Motorsports in the Xfinity Series this past year. Of course, he tried to race at Bristol with the LA production scheme. That did not happen, but Tyler also has made starts in the Truck Series for Raymond Brothers as well. I'm very interested to see how this is going to go for Tyler. I think this is a really great chance and a strong opportunity to be pretty competitive. I do think NBM, depending on what group they work with, I think they've got a good chance and opportunity to be competitive. Really exciting stuff nonetheless, and glad to see Tyler Tomasi will join NBM Motorsports in the Truck Series in a couple weekends from now at Pocono. Excited to see if we can form, and we'll see if we can do a really good job with this team and with this program later this year in the Truck Series at Pocono, and we'll see that truck a couple other times as well. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Corey Kent. As it was announced yesterday that Corey Kent will be performing the pre-race concert for the NASCAR Cup Series race at Iowa Speedway in early August. Now, Corey Kent is an upcoming country music singer. He's had a couple decent-sized hits, and Wild as Her is one of his bigger hits that he's released in recent years, and he also had some other big hits in the last couple years as well in country. I like seeing these new up-and-coming stars get the chance and opportunity to perform pre-race concerts, but I think when it comes to big events like this, I would definitely like to see more of people that are well known instead of people that while they're on their way up and are starting to grow. Like for instance with Atlanta or Echo Park, they've got Jack Black Roses. No one really knows unless you're in the southern rock groups or son in that area. No one really knows who Jet Black Roses is. So I think that it's interesting to bring Corey Kent in. I think he's a solid choice for this kind of stuff. I think he'll do a good job. I think he's really good live, but overall, I think they could have gotten someone that's a little bit more relevant, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Music City Grand Prix. As it was reported by Nathan Brown from the Indy Star yesterday morning that there will be a new name for the Music City Grand Prix for 2025. It is going to be called the Borchetta Bourbon Music City Grand Prix at the Nashville Super Speedway. Of course, the second year in a row, they're going to be at the Nashville Super Speedway, and I do believe for 2026 as well, with the Titan Stadium not being ready to be done at this point, they'll probably be back in Nashville Super Speedway next year. Obviously, Scott Borchetta is a major promoter for this event, and Borchetta Bourbon coming in, which there's been a lot of promotion for that, makes a lot of sense. I think the name is certainly interesting for sure. I thought there'd be a chance and possibly would see some changes for that. For the Music City Grand Prix, they've had the Big Machine Music City GP, and now Borchetta Bourbon is coming in with the new name for this year. So I think it is certainly interesting for sure. I do like the name change definitely, at least for this year, and maybe we'll see it next year as well. We'll just have to kind of wait and see what happens on that front. Nonetheless, certainly interesting. We got a new name for the race at Nashville, which I think is certainly interesting for IndyCar, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Brad Perez. As it was announced yesterday that Brad Perez will drive the number 45 for Alpha Prime Racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series next weekend at Mexico City. Brad Perez has made select starts in the NASCAR Xfinity Series with the Alpha Prime Racing organization. He, of course, has been working there, I believe, as a tire specialist for that team, if I'm not mistaken, and as a pit crew guy, I'm pretty sure. But he's also made select starts with that program this year as well. And to be fair, I think Brad Perez has had a lot more speed this year than the results have shown. So I think at times Alpha Prime Racing has had a lot of speed, but there's also been times where this team has been very inconsistent. I think Brad Perez will get a solid performance with this team. I think he's a really good road course racer in the 45 car because it's had some decent runs. I do think that Brad could be in for a really strong run in Mexico. I think a top 20 is certainly possible if a lot of the stars align. There's going to be Cup guys running like Christopher Bell and Daniel Suarez among other guys in the field, maybe even Kyle Busch too, perhaps, because we had heard Kyle Busch might make a start in the Xfinity Series at some point this year. But I think Brad will have a solid performance. I think he'll do a solid job. Glad to see he'll get the chance and opportunity to join up with Alpha Prime Racing next weekend in the Xfinity Series at Mexico City. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Frankie Muniz. As it was announced yesterday that Frankie Muniz will run in the Mustang Challenge Invitational in Lamont in about a week or so from now. This Lamont Invitational is an event that's going to be happening. I believe Jim Farley, who works as a higher up in Ford's group, he's part of this. And some other big names like Tanner Faust have also been announced for this as well. Frankie Muniz is working very closely with the Ford group over there. Of course, he's made some starts in GTs, I'm pretty sure, but also has made a lot of starts in ARCA with Rhett Jones Racing. Currently, he's full-time in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series for Raymond Brothers Racing, which we all know so far this year. It has been a major struggle for Frankie Muniz, and the pace and speed has just not been there for him in this season because the Raymond Brothers don't have overall have the pace and speed to be major factors in serious contenders. I really hope Frankie can do a good job. It's a really great opportunity for him. We saw people like Haley Deegan get the chance to do some stuff with Mustang. We've, of course, seen people like Ben Rhodes and Harrison Burton over the years do this, and I really hope for Frankie's sake he can do a really good job. Do I expect Frankie to be a major factor? I got to be honest, no. I don't think he's going to be a major factor in any way, shape, or form, but I think this is still nonetheless a great opportunity for Frankie. I hope he does a really solid job, and I hope he can show some good pace and speed. So I think Frankie's a talented driver. I know it's been a struggle for him, but same time, I hope he can have a lot of success and do a really good job in this Ford Mustang Invitational. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Connor Zilisch. Now, we do have a couple Connor Zilisch stories to talk about today on the channel, but first of all is around an event that Connor Zilisch went to. So Red Bull had this big event happening, I believe, over in Europe over the last week or so, and of course with the Xfinity Series having a week off and not racing this weekend, he had the opportunity to go over. A lot of people are wondering why Shane Van Gisbergen wasn't over there. Well, Shane Van Gisbergen, of course, isn't competing this weekend in Michigan, and there would not have been really a chance and opportunity for him to go over to this big event. But for Connor Zilisch, he works very closely with the Red Bull group. He's very highly up in that group, and they're very high on him over there. I mean, he got to talk to Max Verstappen, which we're going to talk about Max here in the second half of this episode, about maybe doing a NASCAR start in the future. But we know Red Bull is very closely aligned with Connor Zilisch. They really like him. They like what he's doing. He's very talented. Trackhouse is very high on him as well. And going and doing events like this could be really big as well. I mean, Justin Marks is over there helping out in a really big way with him. So I think this is something that I really enjoy. I love seeing drivers going out and doing different things and competing in different events like this, or coming out and doing big events, especially to grow the presence of NASCAR and maybe take it very seriously. That's what we kind of wanted to see with Kyle Larson, maybe going and run the Australia event, which of course that did not end up happening, unfortunately. But I think going out and doing this Red Bull event is a huge deal. They could be a big sponsor for next year for Connor. Of course, we're going to be with him in a couple more races that we're going to talk about here in just a short little bit. But pretty excited nonetheless to see that Red Bull is working more closely with him and doing more stuff with Connor Zilisch. Really awesome and really exciting stuff. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about podiums. As it was reported by Dustin Law from NBC Sports, that NASCAR will have podium celebrations in Mexico City for the NASCAR Cup Series race and the Xfinity Series races at Mexico City. We have seen the podium celebrations before. IndyCar, of course, did it for their races at the Thermal Club over the last couple of years. They were not very popular. NASCAR actually did it during the Busch Light Clash at the Los Angeles Coliseum in 2022, 2023, and I also believe they did it in the final year of 2024. I think something like this is certainly interesting, I think, because it's a new big event. NASCAR is trying to do a lot of different things, kind of going off of what Formula One does from time to time and what IndyCar does from time to time. I do think podiums, again, are certainly interesting for sure. I think there's a lot of really good intrigue around having a podium like this in an event like this for the first event, which there's a lot of hype around this event. And I think there's some very big intrigue when you have an event like this, trying something new and trying something different. So I like that they're doing this, at least for this event. Now, I don't want to see podiums become a consistent thing for every event. I don't want to see when we go to Chicago, for example, in a couple weeks from now, I don't want to see a lot of different, I don't want to see a podium celebration like this. I think for an event like this, so a first-time event, I think it is certainly an interesting thing that they're going to be doing. I like something like this. I think it's cool. I think it's kind of flashy, and I think there's some brilliance to this. I honestly like them doing and trying something new out like this. I think it is certainly interesting. They're going to be bringing a podium out to the event of Mexico. I think it's very interesting, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Carson Hocevar. Now, we do have a couple Carson Hocevar stories we're going to talk about on the channel today. But the first one revolves around an article that Jeff Gluck released earlier today, talking a little bit about Carson Hocevar and his personality. Now, I read through the whole entire Jeff Gluck article, and I gotta say it's one of the best articles that I think Jeff Gluck has ever produced, at least so far this year, in my opinion. He did a really big in-depth of Carson, how much he is a big fan of the sport overall, and how much that he has a lot of people in the industry that don't really like him as much and think he's over-aggressive. There's a lot of people that have been critical of him. Ryan Blaney, Kyle Busch has been very critical of him. I believe Joey Logano's also been a little critical. Ross Chastain, who a lot of people think is a mentor to Carson Hocevar, he's been a little bit critical to Carson Hocevar. And we also know Ricky Stenhouse Jr., who we're going to talk about in a little bit, has been very critical. And a lot of people feel like because of what he's done in the lower series, that he has developed a little bit of a bad reputation. Now, on a personal front for me, I'm actually a really big fan of Carson Hocevar. Yes, I have been critical of Carson Hocevar from time to time when he does things that he shouldn't be doing out there. But at the same token, at the same time, I think some of the things that people criticize Carson for have been a little bit overkill. I think we need someone who isn't going to change your attitude because someone wants him to change that attitude. And I absolutely respect that. I think being a little consistent on the way you act and the way you carry yourself, which I think Carson carries himself very, very well for someone who is only 22 years old, 22 years of age, who's very, very talented. He's been doing an exceptional job with Spire Motorsports this year. If not for bad luck, he would be in the playoffs right now. He's only 4 points outside of the cutoff line, and I think he's done a very solid job with Spire Motorsports this year. He is getting liked by a lot of people, and there's, of course, been people who've compared him to Dale Sr., which I don't really want to make those comparisons at this point, but you've got a lot of people who have in the past compared him to Dale Sr., and I think there's people that like that, and some people, especially the older demographic of fans, who don't like him, while people like my age, for example, who are much older than Carson Hocevar, do like someone like Carson Hocevar because he has a character and does have a personality. So I think there's a lot of things to like about Carson Hocevar, and I think there's some certain interesting things revolving around the guy, and I do like some of the things he does. Don't agree with everything he does, but I do like some of the things that Carson does, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Brazil. Now, earlier today, there was an exclusive article that came out from Motorsports.com that I feel like did not get a ton of traction, but it revolves around the future of Brazil in NASCAR. Now, obviously, there was a lot of reports and rumblings earlier this year, then there was a lot of talk and conversations right before the season began, or during the Clash, I should say, that there was a lot of talk that NASCAR could potentially be going to Brazil for the Clash in 2026. And a lot of people thought there'd be talk we would be going to Interlagos potentially for the 2026 season. However, Steve Phelps has confirmed in this article as well, and Motorsports.com has learned as well, that NASCAR will not be going to Interlagos or Brazil for the 2026 season. Instead, it sounds like the Clash will once again return to Bowman Gray for the 2026 season. I actually do agree with this. I think that Bowman Gray, especially for its first year and its first event, it was a very solid and a really, really successful event. One, I think it was one of the best short track races we have seen in the next-gen car. And number two, it was a very solid event itself. A lot of people really enjoyed it, and I think that keeping it in that area for the beginning of the year so you don't have to be as much travel, considering you have the Daytona 500 happening 2 weeks from then, I think if you would have gone to Brazil for 2026, one, I don't think the teams would have been prepared, and number two, I'm not even sure if we would have had entirely full fields because there has been talk of an international event. Going back to the international side of things, though, I think down the road going to Interlagos or going to Brazil, I think it's something that NASCAR will do down the road. I just think right now because there's so much focus on trying to make sure, one, we get the racing product to be better on those short tracks and the road courses especially, but number two, having that increase of fans because Brazil, when you look at analytics for a lot of YouTubers especially, there is a lot of people who are certainly interested in that side of the demographic, and I think that's something to look at as well. But I think right now the main focus for NASCAR, if they're going to go international, we know there's talk of them going to Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in 2026 for the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series, but I don't think we need to have a ton of international races. I think 1 or 2 a year. We don't even know what the future of Mexico is past this year, though some say we do have a contract for next year. There's still some unknowns on that front at this time. I think going to Brazil is something that NASCAR should look at for sure, but I think as of right now, the focus is looking at it domestically. I think that we'll look at that, and I think it'll be something to watch out for. But I think down the road, I think we should go to Brazil because I think it'd be fun. But I think for 2026, it sounds like at the moment, they are not going to be going to Brazil, which I think is a smart decision that they can make at this moment. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Max Verstappen. Now, I've already talked about the fact that Connor Zilisch was at this Red Bull event doing some promotion for the NASCAR side of things. And there was a video that surfaced from Trackhouse Racing earlier today on X/Twitter. And it looked like Max Verstappen went over and he shook Connor Zilisch's hand. And Connor Zilisch asked him, maybe in a little bit of a joking fashion, but asked him, would you like to get behind the wheel of this car? And Max Verstappen basically said, didn't deny and say, no, I'm not interested. He basically said, I definitely would like to get behind the wheel of this race car and definitely try it out. We all know there, of course, has been a lot of talk about drivers coming in and driving the Project 91 car. The 87 car, which he is going to drive in a couple more races that we're going to talk about here in just a short little bit. We know that there's a lot of international expression, and this is not the first time we have seen Trackhouse try to court Max Verstappen over to run a NASCAR event. At the end of last year, Daniel Suarez was at the Las Vegas Grand Prix and actually was talking to Max Verstappen. In the Project 91 account, the Trackhouse car, they were trying to recruit Max Verstappen then. Of course, Julia Piquet is Max Verstappen's sister-in-law, and you can kind of say that a little bit as well, brother-in-law and all that kind of stuff with Max Verstappen and Daniel Suarez. But many people have wanted Max Verstappen to come and try NASCAR. Now, he is under contract with Red Bull through the 2028 season, and it doesn't sound like right now he is going to leave Red Bull at least until that contract is over. By the end of that contract, Max Verstappen, I believe, will be around 30 or 31 years old, so he'll be in his early 30s at that point. And many people think that he is going to leave Formula One once his contract is over. I would love to see Max Verstappen come over and do a race for Project 91, but he's got a lot of focus on Formula One. Now, I think if Red Bull could be the sponsor for those events that he gets to do, I think you could actually see something like this happen. I would definitely think many of us would love to see Max Verstappen come over and do some NASCAR stuff. I think it'd be really, really huge, especially since we hear a lot of talk and conversation about who's the best driver in the world between Kyle Larson and Max Verstappen, which, by the way, Kyle Larson never said that he's the best driver in the world. He just said he's an all-around better driver than Max Verstappen, which at the moment I do agree. Now, that being said, if Max beats Larson, then maybe he can then have that conversation on the all-around drivers. But I think it'd be awesome for Max Verstappen to come and do some NASCAR stuff. We've seen a lot of international presence. I think about Elio Castroneves, who came in and ran the Daytona 500 this year. I think about other drivers who've driven the Project 91 car, the rumors of Daniel Ricciardo doing it. Obviously, that did not happen. But you think about Kimi Räikkönen, Shane Van Gisbergen, who's now a full-time guy, and then, of course, other drivers who've expressed interest in running the Project 91 car. I think it'd be awesome for it to happen. I think it'd be huge for motorsports, and I really hope we do get to see the chance and opportunity in the not-so-distant future. Maybe Max Verstappen getting the chance and opportunity to running with the Trackhouse team. We'll see if that happens in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Carson Hocevar once again. Now, we've already talked about the article that surfaced from Jack Gluck earlier today. But one thing that it needs to be talked about is what happened between Carson Hocevar and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Now, obviously, if you watch the NASCAR Cup Series race on Prime at National Super Speedway, you saw the contact between Carson Hocevar and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Going into turn number 3 on lap 10 of stage number 2. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. came down the racetrack a little bit, but Carson Hocevar sends it in the corner completely and wipes out Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Stenhouse ends up spinning out really hard into the outside wall. He gets a ton of damage, and his night is over. And he is very furious, that being Ricky Stenhouse Jr. He is not very happy with Carson Hocevar after the incident. And of course, Carson Hocevar said originally when it had happened, he said that he put a lot more blame on Ricky Stenhouse Jr. for that incident than he put himself blamed for that. And then, of course, there was a video that surfaced from the Motorsports podcast that RJ Starvik does every single week with a couple drivers. And Ricky Stenhouse Jr. says that at the time when they were recording this, that he had not reached out and messaged him. Well, Carson Motorsports actually responded to this on SiriusXM NASCAR radio yesterday, and he actually has told people, including Daniel Trotta, that he's actually texted Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and wanted to apologize for what happened and said, if you want to talk at Michigan this weekend, we can definitely go ahead and do that. Now, Carson did also say that he isn't going to change the way he drives overall. He says he's going to refine himself a little bit, and he's not going to be as mad as someone gets into him a little bit, but he also said that he is not going to change the way he drives and the way he races. I think he said all the right things on the SiriusXM radio. I think the most important thing is I think he is self-aware that sometimes he drives him way over his head sometimes. And I think especially when you are 20 or 21 years of age, as young as he is, you're still learning and you're going to get better. Now, I think Carson Hocevar at times this year as well has shown a lot of improvement as a driver. And look at the results. He finished second. Despite the fact he got in the Stenhouse, he still finished in second place. And he's doing that in a Spire Motorsports car. I think he's a very, very talented race car driver who has a lot of potential to be a NASCAR Cup champion. I'm very serious. I think he's got the potential in the world of racing to be a NASCAR Cup champion. But I think some of these antics and some of the mistakes he's making as a young driver, he's got to clean up, which as he does get older and gets more experience with the next-gen car, I think he will get that figured out because I think Carson is absolutely that good of a driver. He's proven it so far this year. He's shown some really good pace and very, very strong speed at times with Spire. And like I mentioned earlier, he would be in the playoffs right now if not for some of the things that have happened to this team. But I think he's been doing a really good job with Spire, but he does sometimes make those mistakes. Now, he's done less of the over-aggressive things and the things like he did in the Truck Series, in the Cup Series so far. And he's only not really made a few mistakes. I mean, some of the people going after him in Atlanta, like Kyle Busch, thought maybe that was a little unnecessary for Kyle to be upset with him over that. And Kyle's still not happy with an incident that happened, I think, at Berlin like 10 years ago. But I think for Carson, if he can just clean it up a little bit, because he does have a lot of people that are not happy with him currently at the moment, if he could just clean up some of the antics that he does on the track, I think that would be better for everybody. So we'll see what happens down the road for Carson, and I really hope they can have a talking conversation. We'll probably hear at some point tomorrow or Sunday on what happened if they had the conversation. Maybe a fire will break out. Who knows at this point? But I'm glad to see that Carson has responded, and I think he said a lot of the right things, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Connor Zilisch. Now, I did a video covering this story on the channel yesterday, but it was announced yesterday that Connor Zilisch is adding a few more starts in the NASCAR Cup Series in 2025. He will drive the number 87 car for Trackhouse Racing with Red Bull sponsorship for 2 more NASCAR Cup Series events in 2025. His next scheduled Cup Series start will be Atlanta Motor Speedway. Sorry, Echo Park Speedway, even though I'm going to call Atlanta Motor Speedway. And after that will be Watkins Glen as well. This will be the third and fourth career NASCAR Cup Series starts that Connor Zilisch has had. Of course, he did make a few starts so far this year. He ran a circuit of the Americas, showed some really impressive speed, especially in practice, had one of the strongest cars there. He got caught up in an incident early in the race and still nearly recovered to finish inside the top 10. But then, of course, got caught up in an incident with Daniel Suarez, ended up crashing and having a really, really bad wreck. And he just unfortunately ran into Daniel Suarez, and both their days were unfortunately effectively over. And then, of course, he did run the Coke 600. Yes, he got involved in an incident, struggled in qualifying, but he did a really good job to recover and only finished 2 laps down and still finished in 23rd position, which for a driver who's the youngest ever to compete in the Coke 600, I think that is very, very impressive. We have been seeing Connor Zilisch thrive and grow as a race car driver over the course of the last couple of years. And I think you look at all the success that Connor's had. He's won a Sebring 12 Hours in LMP2, the World's 24 in LMP2. His Xfinity Series debut, he picked up the win. He's already won a road course race this year in the NASCAR Xfinity Series at Circuit of the Americas. Now, we obviously know he's a fantastic road course racer, but there's also the talk and conversation in the industry that we may see him move up to the NASCAR Cup Series full-time in 2026. The more starts he gets, the more likely that this could happen. There's also talk, though, that he could still remain in the NASCAR Xfinity Series next year with Junior Motorsports, which I also think is certainly a really, really big possibility. For Connor, I think this is 2 interesting tracks to go with, considering he unfortunately got the back injury at Talladega, which is super speedway, kind of like Atlanta is. I do worry a little bit about that, but I also think Connor is going to be very competitive in that race. The Trackhouse cars have been really good at Atlanta Motor Speedway. They've been very, very good there. I expect him to be a factor there. And going to Watkins Glen, I think he's not going to contend for the overall victory, but I think top 5 and top 10 is very, very possible. We've seen Shaman Gisberg and how good he's been. And I think because it's a Cup, guys, it's going to be a little more difficult for him to be extremely successful. But I do think that Connor Zilisch will be a big factor for at least a top 10 and maybe even a top 5. And if he goes out there and wins that race, I then think people are going to say, yeah, move him up, because I think you look at the future Trackhouse, and we're going to talk about that here in just a second, in the future, what the program is going to look like and what they're going to be looking like in 26. But I think for Zilisch, it's a great opportunity. He's got the Red Bull sponsorship with it as well. He's got Darian Grubb, who has had a lot of success as a crew chief over the years. I think Connor is one of the most talented young drivers that we've seen come up to the ranks in a very long time. And again, I do expect that Connor Zilisch will be a factor for sure at Watkins Glen, though I do expect SVG, Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, Kyle Busch even as well, Christopher Bell, William Byron, all those guys who've had success on road courses over the last couple of years. I do expect him to be a factor on those tracks against him, but Zilisch will be in a contender for that top 10 run. So we'll see what happens, and we'll see how he ends up doing. But to me, I do expect Zilisch to be a pretty big factor. And again, I do think he's going to have a pretty strong chance and a really good opportunity to be a threat. We'll see how he does, and we'll see if he can definitely show up and perform when we do get to the track next week, in a couple weeks from now in Atlanta, and also Watkins Glen. Excited to see what he can do and see if he can perform. He'll probably have to qualify his way in, considering some of the stuff that happened earlier today with the charter with 2311 and Front Row Motorsports as well. We'll see what happens for Connor Zilisch. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're doing a little bit of a silly season update in regards to not just 2025, but 2026. Earlier today, jski.com put out their chart for the 2026 NASCAR driver lineup, and there's some interesting things surrounding 2025 and also 2026 as well, whether it's the full-time drivers or the part-time drivers currently at the moment. Let's begin by talking about Austin Cindric in the number 2 car for Team Penske. We know right now that Austin Cindric does have a contract with Team Penske through the 2026 season, so technically Austin Cindric could be a free agent at the end of the 2026 year. Now, if he steps up his game and continues to perform at the level that he is performing currently at the moment, I do think Austin Cindric is going to return to Team Penske in 2027. I think he's been having a really good year with Penske. He's been faster than Joey Logano generally throughout this year, though I think Logano's starting to finally thrive a little bit in the second half of this year. I think Cindric, at least for now, will stay through 26. I think the big question will be 2027. That depends on performance, because he'll be nearly 30 at that point. It'll be time for him to step up. Next, we'll talk about Kyle Larson. We all know Kyle Larson is in a contract year for 2026. I do expect Larson at some point either this year or next year to sign a multi-year extension with the team. I would not be surprised if it's a 4 or 5 year extension that goes all the way to like 2029 or 2030. Larson's been the best driver at Hendrick Motorsports the last couple of years. I expect Larson to continue staying with Hendrick at least for the next couple of years. Next, Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch only has a 1-year contract with RCR. They extended that contract that he originally had. I do think Kyle Busch will be looking at other options with a lot of rides potentially opening up next year. There could be a lot of really good opportunities, but there's also a chance he stays at RCR. I think Spire is actually a really decent option to go with if that becomes a possibility, but I do think Kyle Busch will definitely be a little bit of a factor in the silly season for 2026. Another name that's interesting to me is Ty Dillon. According to J-Ski, we don't really know what the future Ty Dillon is. Now, we do expect that Ty Dillon more than likely may sign a 1-year extension. My theory has been is that if Daniel Suarez does not return to Trackhouse Racing, I think that Dillon would lose his seat, but go down to Xfinity or go to a third Kaulig Racing seat. I think Dillon's been solid this year, but he's not been spectacular and has not been setting the world on fire so far this year. So I think there's a chance of him being out of the ride at the end of the year. Next, let's talk about Denny Hamlin. Denny Hamlin is in a contract year for 25, and I believe also 26. There's an opportunity for him to sign. I think because Denny Hamlin's been really good this year, I don't see Denny Hamlin going anywhere into 2026. I think Denny Hamlin will potentially retire at the end of 2026. That's my early prediction when it comes to the silly season for next year. So I think Hamlin will be 46 at the end of next year. So Hamlin, I do expect to return to Joe Gibbs Racing with no issues and no questions. The big question will be after this year. I think that's a big question currently at the moment. Next, Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace's future could be, in fact, in a little bit of jeopardy with the lawsuit, same with Tyler Reddick as well. But I also think Bubba Wallace will want to stay with 2311 Racing. He's been with that team for 5 or 6 years at this point. He is going to be in a contract year next year. We've confirmed that with Jordan Bianchi at this point. But I do expect that we will see him be back at least for the foreseeable future. He's been having a really good year with 2311. And I think that Bubba's been really stepping up the game and doing a really strong job with this team and program. Next, Riley Herbst. Riley Herbst is in a contract year next year, and Herbst I expect to potentially be out of the program. I think when you look at Corey Heim, I think Herbst is so much better than Corey Heim. He should be full-time in Cup over Riley Herbst. He's been a disaster this year in Cup competition, but because of Stewart-Haas racing money, among other things coming into effect, that's why he's not going anywhere right now and not changing things at the moment. Next, let's go to Eric Jones. Eric Jones will be in a contract year in 2026. I do think Eric Jones will stay with Legacy past 2026. He's doing a really good job with Legacy this year. Times had a really good run at Nashville, had pretty good speed at the Coke 600 as well. I don't think they're going to want to get rid of him. I think he stays with the team. Moving on, Corey Heim. Corey Heim, obviously, he's a driver who's got a development deal with today's decision. There could be some uncertainty around that. I think Corey Heim will be in Xfinity next year with Sam Hunt Racing more than likely. Make it start to 2011. I don't think he should be in trucks. He should be at least in Xfinity right now because he's that good to be in the NASCAR Xfinity Series at this particular moment. Moving on, Tricon Garage. We don't know what the future of this team is looking at right now. We know we've heard some rumors that Tricon could have had more Cup starts this year. Mark Truex Jr. kind of spilled the beans at Daytona Media Week. There's still been no updates on that front of what the future of that team's going to be looking like for Cup, but they could be a team to watch out for in the silly season. Next, let's go back to Hendrick and talk about Alex Bowman. Next year, Alex Bowman is going to be in a contract year. Every year, we're hearing rumors that Alex Bowman's going to lose his seat. Alex Bowman's going to lose his ride. Personally, I think it'd be a bad decision for Hendrick to get rid of him. He's performing very, very well with Hendrick. Yes, I know he's only won one race in the last couple of years, but he's a really good driver, can get the best out of equipment. I expect Bowman to stay with Hendrick past this year in 2026 and probably go to 28 because of the Ally contract that they have, so I don't think he's going to be going anywhere, at least for the next couple of years. Moving on to Trackhouse Racing, let's just put all this in the same thing. Shane Van Gisbergen and Daniel Suarez and Connor Zilch. Those drivers are fighting for those seats at Trackhouse Racing right now on what the future of that team's going to look like. Connor Zilch has been really doing good in Xfinity, but there's been talk he might stay next year in Xfinity competition. And then if you keep the same things as Shane Van Gisbergen and Daniel Suarez, you might see that being a consistent thing next year. But if I had to choose between Shane Van Gisbergen and Daniel Suarez, I'm going to go Shane Van Gisbergen. I think SVG is starting to get better on the ovals, and Suarez is not being consistently good right now at this particular moment, and there's a lot of inconsistencies right now with Suarez. So my thing is that if Zilch gets promoted, I think he takes seat from Suarez, and Suarez goes over to Colin Racing. And finally, Junior Motorsports. We hear this every single year that Junior Motorsports may make the jump to Cup. There's been talk about it more this year than ever, especially during Daytona week. Junior had kind of talked about it. It's unknown if things have changed on that front right now, but I think there definitely is a chance and possibility that we're going to see some changes when maybe Junior Motorsports go into Cup. We'll have to kind of wait and see on the front. Maybe they partner up with Trackhouse for Connor Zilch. So that's really the big headlines going into the silly season for the next couple of years. Other things I noted, like Chastain's contract is, I think they're 27 or 28. Ryan Blaney's got a long-term deal. I believe that we know William Byron said they're 29. LA said they're 27. In general, I'm interested to see what the silly season is going to look like past this year, but I think some big things will be coming in the not-so-distant future in regards to the said silly season. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode as we're talking about an update on the 23XM Racing and Frommer Motorsports / NASCAR lawsuit. Now, I did a video covering the story on the channel earlier today, but we had a major significant update earlier today on the lawsuit between 23XM Racing and Frommer Motorsports, as we've had a major change in the lawsuit and who is in control of it. According to what was reported by Bob Pockrass and many reporters in the industry, the U.S. Court of Appeals has ruled in favor of NASCAR, and they have vacated the original preliminary injunction for 23XM Racing and Frommer Motorsports. What does this mean? Well, let's go back a couple months. Back in December, of course, 23XM Racing and Frommer Motorsports have filed for a preliminary injunction. That preliminary injunction was originally granted by Kenneth Bell, who was the original judge in this case, or the second judge after the original judge, Frank Whinney, recused himself from the case. What he did, the preliminary injunction gave, was basically granted them have the charter status for the 2025 season, despite the fact that they did not sign the charter agreement. All the drivers that are under contract, a lot of them do have in their agreements that they sign the contracts where they have to have charter agreements. I believe Bubba Wallace has that provision in his charter agreement. I believe Riley Herbst has that. I believe Tyler Reddick, because we know Reddick for sure is a driver who had that. And some of the sponsors were questioning because they didn't have charters at the time. Of course, like maybe Moneyline leaving the team. And we know Love's Travel Stop and Monster Energy was not very happy about stuff that had happened. Now, there was also a big update as well. There was reported by Bob Pockers. They say in the reports, they say have found no support for the proposition that they could have the preliminary injunction. Basically going back to what judges said during the original hearing that happened about a month or so ago, where they said you can't just have the cake and eat it too. You can't compete as a charter team, but then sue NASCAR and get all the charter benefits. That's what the judges were absolutely saying. Now, what does this mean for 24/7 racing and Front Row Motorsports going forward? Well, this is a major turning point because there is a potential possibility that in 3 weeks from the time of recording this, there's a very good chance in the next 3 weeks that these charters could be gone. Not just the 4 charters that they had, but the charters they produce from Stewart-Haas Racing. They could just go back to NASCAR. Now, NASCAR could potentially still give them those guaranteed spots, but there's a very good chance that they may end up becoming open teams once again. There was a statement that was also released earlier tonight from Jeffrey Kessler, who of course has been the lawyer in the case between 24/7 Racing and Front Row Motorsports. They did say they're very disappointed with the decision that was made today, as there was a revised inclusion in that basically was a little bit outdated according to what he said. They are reviewing it, and we'll have to wait and see if they do appeal it. Now, a big thing to note is that just because this happened does not mean the lawsuit is completely over, and even noted by Jeffrey Kessler that the lawsuit is not going to be completely over because of this decision. This is just a major setback, though, because now in the next 3 weeks, there's a very good chance that possibly that all the drivers and the teams could have major effect. And this also could play a major role in the silly season side of things as well, because I've already mentioned this, but Tyler Reddick, Bubba Walls, Todd Gillen, Noah Gragson, Zane Smith, Riley Herbst, all, and I believe Corey Haim as well, all have provisions in their contracts where they are supposed to compete as charter teams. Now, does this mean that Tyler Reddick and Bubba Wallace, any of those guys, are going to jump ship before the end of the year? No, they're going to finish the whole entire season. We're too far into the regular season at this point, because after this weekend's race in Michigan, we've only got 12 weekends left in the regular season. We don't have that much left in the regular season, and with Reddick being in the top 10 in points and Bubba Wallace in contention to make the playoffs this year as well, I don't see them changing anything, at least for this year. But I think that when you look at the end of this season, you could see some changes happen because Monster Energy is probably going to want Reddick to be in a charter car. So maybe we see Reddick at Joe Gibbs Racing, perhaps. I think that could be certainly interesting, because there's been a lot of changes in this lawsuit as well over time. Originally, it looked like that 24/7 Front Row were losing the case back at the beginning. Then they had to change in the judges. And basically, they got granted that preliminary injunction, and the thing was going back toward against NASCAR. And now we've had major changes when the judges went back to the side. Now, do I think that we're going to see 24/7 Front Row appeal this? Absolutely. And that could take a lot more time. We could be seeing that being only not just 3 more weeks, but I could absolutely see this lasting a lot longer, because that appeal is probably going to go sometime into July and probably August as well. We're got a lot of lawsuit stuff coming very soon. And I think when you look at the charter side of things and then losing their charters, I think that's definitely really unfortunate if they are to lose their charters because of this lawsuit. And what does NASCAR do with those charters? We know there's rumors of Dodge coming in. Do they hand those charters off to other teams that are looking to expand? We know Jimmy Johnson and Legacy Motor Club, they're trying to have a third car for next year. That could be a potential possibility. Do you send one of your drivers, if you're 2311 racing out like Bubba Wallace, for example, out to Legacy for a year? Kind of go back to that Legacy and Toyota pipeline that Bubba Wallace was part of many years ago when it was a Chevrolet team. That could certainly be a possibility. What does this mean for the business side of things? Do we see a settlement come into play? There is certainly a possibility, but nothing's changed on that front. And NASCAR, even if there is a settlement, unless they do go ahead and stop this lawsuit altogether, you have this whole thing that's still going to be going on. And to me, if you're a 24/7 Racing and Front Row Motorsports fan, you're definitely really disappointed with the decision, which I completely understand. But if you're on the side of NASCAR over this, you're definitely happy with the decision. And I think there's a lot of people that are happy on both sides of things. I lean more toward the 24/11 and Front Row Motorsports side of things, because I do think the sport needs to have changes when it comes to the economic side of things, the business model. The business model is very outdated. It's been outdated for a very, very long time. And I think there's a lot of things that do need to change for the business model of the sport and the sport long term to be in a much better position. But right now, I just think where it's at and where it stands at currently at the moment, I just don't think it's going to be sustainable long term unless actual changes are made to get the sport in a little bit of a better position. And I just think there need to be changes to the business model, again, for things to get better. I'm very interested to see what happens with those charters and what NASCAR exactly will do with those charters going into next year. I think there's some intrigue around it. I think there's some maybe excitement around that, and I think some big things are coming, but this is a major, major bomb. This is definitely a setback for those teams, and I think that NASCAR has a pretty big win here. This is definitely a major, major win because now they can basically consider them unchartered teams going forward and not pay them the money, which could have a big effect on their pockets, and then maybe they have to go back to the drawing board and go to the negotiating side of things. I'm very interested to see what happens on that front going forward and see what could happen with the remainder of the lawsuit going forward in the not so distant future. Very intrigued and very kind of a little surprised to see the changes happening here, but I'm definitely interested to see what happens with the remainder of this lawsuit going forward, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Dodge and Ram. Now, we have been talking a lot about Dodge and Ram on this channel over the course of the last couple days and really since the beginning of this year, going back to the end of February. So during Daytona 500 week, it was reported by Chris Nye from Catchfence.com that Dodge and Ram were expected to return to NASCAR in 2026 in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series with a potential opening to go Cup racing in 2027 or 2028. Then Jordan Bianchi got the same report during the Atlanta weekend, and since that time, there was a lot of quietness around these reports until we got a report out there this past week that it sounds like Cletus McFarland is one of the big names that is in the running currently at the moment to join up with this new Dodge Ram program, and it sounds like celebrities are playing a big role on it. And it sounds like there is also a pretty big announcement that might be coming around Dodge and Ram sometime at the end of this week. There's been a teaser video that has surfaced that there might be an announcement coming this Sunday at Michigan. Think about this. Michigan is a big car part of the country. The Detroit area is major for the automaker industry. The Ram brand being revealed there would make a lot of sense. And we have gotten multiple leaked photos that have surfaced over the course of the last 24 hours. Last night, I believe it was but someone in that vein put out a little bit of leak that surfaced on Reddit. There was a video that surfaced from the Auto Buyer's Guide that was showing off a lot of the new Dodge things. You look in the original background before they had the private it and blur it. In the background, there was a Dodge Ram that surfaced back there. It was a 2025 going to 2026 body, which of course they're expected to have new body styles for the 2026 season. And you can clearly see on the front of that truck, that is definitely a Dodge Ram logo. And now, as I was recording this video, there's been another leak that surfaced thanks to NASCARson on Twitter, showing yes, there is a Dodge Ram at Michigan International Speedway. Again, we don't exactly know what all the details are going to be that are going to be announced. Are they going to announce at this announcement, are they going to announce just the Ram program for 2026, or are they going to be announcing a lot of different things? Because from what we hear, we are hearing that Dodge will not just be coming in for the Ram program in 2026, but we are absolutely hearing right now that for 2027 and even 2028 potentially, they may be looking to make plans for the next couple of years. And now we got to start speculating as well, because this is absolutely a reality. Who is going to go over here and what teams could switch over? Well, I look at Thorsport Racing. Thorsport Racing, from what I understand, they're in the final year of their contract, and let's be real and honest, Thorsport Racing has been struggling in the Craftsman Truck Series this year. When Ty Majeski, the defending champion, is on the cutoff line of making the playoffs and two of your drivers are not even locked in right now, Ben Rose is 50-plus points back and Matt Crafton being like 80 points below the cutoff line right now, considering that both are champions, and you've had three champions who are struggling, and your best driver this year has been Jake Garcia, who took over for Haley Deegan a couple years ago, and that's when they switched over to Ford, was 2023, when she joined up with this program. From my understanding, they are in the final year of their contract with that said program for Ford. I think Thorsport makes the most sense, plus they've switched manufacturers in the past. Someone mentioned maybe Rackley were racing recently, and Rackley would certainly be interesting. I think Rackley going over there would make sense. I think that'd be a team to watch out for that could go over there. Maybe they get a couple trucks. Who knows at this point? And then the other big one that we have heard is GMS Racing. GMS Racing has been one that's been rumored to be coming back for the last couple of months, and many people think GMS could be the program that does switch over. We've been seeing Spencer Gallagher race quite a bit, but many people think that Cletus McFarland might be associated with this said program and making starts in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series next year. I think Cletus going full-time would not be the way to go about it. Some think he could go full-time. I personally think Cletus should hold off on at least going full-time at this moment and should just be a part-time driver. If he wants to be a full-time driver in ARCA next year, that would definitely be a good decision, but he's got a lot of business ventures and a lot of business opportunities when it comes to the Freedom Factory, among other things. I don't think going full-time would be the best solution for Cletus McFarland at this particular moment in time and point. But then you think about some other stuff. What about Cup? Do we see a factory Dodge team in 2027? Because with Ram coming in, Dodge is going to follow in the next couple of years. I look at Trackhouse Racing to be the most likely team that is going to switch over to Dodge. They've been rumored to be leaving. They're not the number one Chevy team currently at the moment. The number one Chevy team is Hendrick. And Spire Motorsports is ascending on that pipeline right now of the second best team at Chevrolet. They are starting to become that second best team, though I think Trackhouse Racing right now is number 2 on the Chevy pipeline when it comes to speed at the moment. But I think that Trackhouse would be the most likely option to go over there, and none of the drivers are under Chevy contract. I don't believe Ross Chastain is, I don't think Suarez is, and I don't think Shane Van Gisbergen is. I think Zillage maybe is, but I don't remember exactly if he's a Trackhouse development guy or if he's a Chevrolet development guy at this point. Trackhouse make the most sense. They're struggling for speed at times this year. I could see that being the most likely logical move that ends up happening. I look at Legacy being an outside opportunity, but they're getting much faster with Toyota. They're starting to show more speed. So why would you want to switch over? Plus, Toyota is very much trying to get a third charter for that program, though I don't think Corey Haim's going over there at this time. Sounds like they're going to be keeping the same things for 23-11 going into next year. Some mention RFK Racing. I just don't see RFK Racing going over there. I think Kaulig is the other option, perhaps, that could switch over to Dodge. I think Kaulig would be the interesting one. I think they're a team that has shown some decent speed this year, but I think going over to Dodge would be very, very interesting. And I think Xfinity, you're going to see a couple of those teams in the Chevrolet camp, like a Viking Motorsports perhaps. Maybe see RSS Racing switch over to Dodge. I think that would certainly be interesting. And maybe some other teams from the Chevy camp, like Kaulig, for example, switching over to Dodge. I think it's certainly interesting what's going on. But when you start seeing these Ram leaks, when you start seeing all this kind of stuff, you're thinking, yeah, they're definitely coming back. And I've been hearing rumors about this for the last couple of months. We've been hearing that they're likely coming back. They said an announcement is coming this summer. And I think that's going to be when the lower series silly season is going to open up, because there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to be looking to switch going into 2026. So I'm very interested to see what teams exactly do decide to go over to Dodge going into the 2026 season. I'm very excited about this. It's really awesome that the Ram program is coming back. And again, Cletus McFarland is expected to be one of the drivers for this program at some point, which again, I'm intrigued to see how he'll perform if he does go over there. So we'll see what happens, but nonetheless, really exciting stuff and pretty cool that it looks like Dodge will be making a comeback to the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series and NASCAR competition in 2026, and then the Cup in the next couple of years. So, that is going to be today's long NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go below that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. What are thoughts about Ram likely coming back to NASCAR next year? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are thoughts about the injunction ruling today for 2011 front row, and do you expect an appeal or not? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If any major news breaks later today, we'll discuss it live on the channel. If not, the next time you're going to see me is going to be during the ARCA review. We're probably going to do a review on the ARCA race, but I'm not sure at this point, depending on how the race is. Then tomorrow on the channel, we're going to have reactions to the NASCAR Cup Series qualifying session for the Firekeepers Casino 400, and we're also going to have the Truck Series review. And then, of course, on Sunday, we're going to have the starting lineup for the Firekeepers Casino 400 and the Cup review for that race as well. And then we might do a Shane Van Gisbergen video. We'll have to wait and see. And then on Monday, we should have a NASCAR news video. We'll have that update on that Dodge announcement that is coming. We're going to have content coming on people like Haley Deegan, Shane Van Gisbergen, cars, Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch, Bubba Wallace, Ross Chastain, Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, Ryan Preece, Prime KSI, Logan Paul, Dodge, Cletus McFarland, Connor Zillage, Carson Scoffle, Sam Mayer, Sheldon Creed, all the good stuff. We'll be talking about all the good stuff on the channel in the coming days and weeks. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content, other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.